So senior night, it is the, the strangest senior year, like the oddest college admission season, which makes sense because this is the oddest and most bizarre year I think any of us have experienced. So I wanted to share what the regular timeline looks like, what the timeline is going to look like, and kind of what has changed because of COVID-19. So I'm going to start my presentation and we'll just go from there. As questions pop up, which they will, please stick them in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask me, okay? I am totally good with that.
I have just a quick question, given that I realize I've double booked myself and I may have to jump off this call
Sure.
at some point soonish. About how long do you think the presentation is going to be?
I think I'll go about 45 minutes, maybe an hour, and then there'll be questions.
Okay, great.
So I'm hoping to answer questions as we go, as things come up, but you can also save some questions for the end. And if you have some that are on your mind, you can write them in the chat and I'll probably get to them through the course of, what I'm talking about.
Okay. And you'll make the PDF available to those that...
You know it.
Okay.
PDF, a recording, the whole nine. We got you. I am like not great at this technology bit, but I'm doing my best. Senior parent night. Okay. So we're going to cover a bunch of stuff. I'm going to spend more time on some of these things than others. So for example, admission plans. This is going to be a little less important this year. The testing schedule also less important this year. So here's what has to happen senior year. Our seniors are finalizing their college list, visiting with college reps, and this now means virtual visits. They're revising their essays. They're going to meet with me at least 3 times. That's in their syllabus that they have to. We're going to determine their application plans. They're going to be maybe taking standardized tests. They're going to be requesting letters of rec. They're requesting transcripts. They're potentially visiting colleges. We'll see what happens there. They're keeping up with their course load. They're maintaining their friendships. They're trying to get enough sleep. They're trying to participate in extracurriculars. So these next few months are just so stressful. And I want to acknowledge that first of all. Here's the dates that I'm working with right now. I will, and these are all on Jupiter. By September 18th, I want students to have a working draft of their main essay. By October 1st, a college list that they feel good about. Now, is this list subject to change? Sure, but let's make sure that they're pretty solid with it. On October 6th, we are offering the ACT. We still feel good about being able to offer that safely. October 15th is the really a good goal for getting UT Austin applications in. November 1st is when most of the early college deadlines are, so both early action and early decision. And then December 1st is our goal for having everything done. So I didn't catch that. I'm sorry. So, okay, COVID-19 has obviously changed everything. Among those is that test optional admissions is much more prevalent. That is great news. Test optional means that they are not considering test scores. That's all that means. So some people have taken that to mean, well, if you submit test optional, we're going to assume that your test scores aren't good. That's not the case. This year, test optional means you probably didn't get a chance to take a test. So it's unfair to consider it. given that we are going to be offering the ACT and we have some challenges around that in terms of accreditation, students still can choose whether or not to submit test scores, and it will not negatively affect their applications. The colleges want me to make that incredibly clear to people. Next, since the second semester of junior year ended in such a strange way, some colleges aren't even looking at second semester junior year grades. Not all, but some. So that means that there's a stronger emphasis on senior year grades and a stronger emphasis on essays and letters of recommendation. There's some changes around early decision. Some colleges aren't going to have early decision this year because there's been too much of an interruption and it's going to be hard. Again, this is on a college by college basis. One of my jobs is to communicate everything that we did to change, to like respond to COVID. So there's going to be required statements about how those things changed. Next, colleges have given us a report that says we want students to consider their well-being, their mental health, the well-being of their families. We want them to tell us what they did with this time that they normally would have done something else with, but they really are emphasizing, like, I think there's more compassion in this process than there probably has ever been before. College visits now obviously are virtual, and communicating with colleges is going to require a lot more agency on the students' part. So students are going to have to reach out to college admissions people in a way that they used to be able to just do at a college fair. And finally, most applications are going to have a spot to note how COVID-19 affected your family or you directly in a meaningful way. I mean, obviously it's made us all aware of our mortality, you know, and everything else, but was there an extended illness? Was there a family loss? Was there an employment change? Stuff like that becomes a little bit more important. I saw a bunch of questions show up in the chat, so I'm going to stop sharing for a second and respond. So, okay, in a line, the last date to take the SAT or ACT, seeing as most colleges are not looking at it in terms of merit aid or admissions, like you don't really have to take it. However, some colleges will accept scores from the spring. I mean, March probably will be the last time you'll want to get something in so that you can potentially get a merit aid award or something like that, go up into the next tier.
Hey, this is John Allen. I was the one that asked that question. So for who's looking to go into the military and ROTC,
right,
and they offer a scholarship which they seem to rely fairly heavily on those scores.
Yeah, and the military the academies and ROTC are one of the last holdouts for test optional right now. So we'll be offering the tests again in the spring. And my hope is that this seating that we have in October will suffice in some of those ways. So doing those practice tests. What I'm worried about is students who require it are only going to get one opportunity this year. And normally they'd have, you know, I don't like it when students take more than 3 test more than 3 times. There's no real advantage to doing that. At a certain point, you're spending hours and hours of energy to get 1 point higher or 1 point higher, which is still statistically within the range. So most colleges are like, we don't care about that additional point. But unfortunately, I think this year it's going to be more like students have 1 chance to take it if they're going to take it. Yes, the students have been shown these dates and they're on Jupiter. So they're on Jupiter to see them. with test optional, is a good score still an advantage? So I wouldn't consider it like an advantage. I think it's just another part of what they're looking at. So what the testing shows them is, like here, this student, ideally what it says is here the student has great grades, and look, the tests kind of back that up, right? So I don't know what that means this year. Frankly, like if students join in with, if students have good test scores, I think they're going to be like, cool, they were able to test and they got a good score. Great. That's just another piece of information for them. And then finally, applying early action. So what I usually do is that when I submit a transcript, I'll submit current grades. Now I'll say this year I'm going to submit everyone's current grades. Most years, because I just think colleges need that information. Most years I like submit them if they look good, and then I don't if students are waiting, or some students like really like struggle and then they kind of pull it out right at the end of the semester, and I want to make sure that they're showing the best picture possible. So I usually give them that time. This year I feel like I have to give colleges as much information as possible, so I'm going to submit those grades in progress.
So if Max is applying by November 1st for early action, then you would be showing like the last week of grades. Is that what you mean by current grades?
It's just whatever the grades up until that point are. So how they're doing in their classes up until this point.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to get back to this glorious presentation. So, and again, I'll share this recording and I'll also share a PDF of this presentation with links and everything. So just some basics. The vast majority of colleges in the US have acceptance rates over 50%. That is true. And I think that's really important to remember, is that this idea of ultra selectivity is not true of every college at all. How we apply, we have, most of our students are going to be using Common App or Apply Texas. There are some schools that have institution-specific applications. So the military academies are one of them. Some of the art schools are institution-specific. MIT has its own application. So some schools have very specific applications. Some schools, like the University of California system, have their UC applications. If you're applying to a state college in another state, it might be on Common App, but it might not be. And then there's the coalition, which is kind of falling out of favor, although UT is on the coalition this year. So there are all these different ways to apply, and there's not a ton of overlap with them. So for example, UT is on Apply Texas and Coalition. University of North Texas is on Common App and Apply Texas. Southwestern is on Common App and Apply Texas, but UT Dallas is only on Apply Texas. You see what I'm saying? It's ridiculous, but that's why I'm here. Finally, let's talk about admissions plans. There's early decision, of course. Early decision, the way to remember is that early decision is a decision. It is a binding decision. So applying early decision can be a strategic way of gaining admission into a more selective college. But I will say you will only want to apply early decision if you really, really, really are in love with it and want to go there and you can afford it no matter what. Also, it depends on the school whether it's strategic. Some schools accept 50% of their freshman class from early decision and have a 65% acceptance rate in early decision, but then only have a 20% in regular decision. In a school like that, it's very advantageous to apply early decision. Some other schools, it's not nearly as advantageous and you're losing an opportunity somewhere else. Lucky for you all, I have a spreadsheet with all of that data that I'm sharing with you. So it tells for about 250 schools the rates of application in ED versus regular decision, which can just help make some strategic choices. Early action is non-binding. It's usually in November or December. That can be a good choice too. I like early action because then you're done early. Now, it's also non-binding, and so you get a decision sooner. That can be great. If you feel good about how your application is looking and you feel confident about it. Restricted early action means that you can only apply early to one school, but you can apply in the regular decision pool to others. So Stanford is an example of a school that has restricted early action. And then every school has a regular decision pool. Usually regular decision is January or February application due dates. And I am going to ask that our students apply, even if they're applying regular decision, they get things in by December 1st, because there's enough uncertainty in the world right now. It would be great to be done with your college applications. Finally, there's rolling admissions. So that means that the admissions just keep, you can apply whenever. Not every school has all of these. Some schools have ED, EA, and regular decision. Some schools have ED and regular decision. Some schools have something called priority. It depends on the school. All of that information, though, is on SCORE. SCORE. So, what does a great application look like? Number one, complete error-free information. We've had issues with wrong social security numbers, misplaced names or misspelled names, misspelled addresses, and it screws stuff up. Oh man, I even had a student once who misspelled the name of the college in an essay, and that just hurt my heart. Finally, next, there's an essay that shares the student's voice and perspective. So we want that college essay to be something that only they could have written. We want letters of recommendation from teachers who like the student, and a counselor letter, that's me, that includes any additional info. So I asked last semester for a parent brag sheet from you all, and if you sent that in, great. If you haven't, I'll resend it, because that's super helpful information for me, because students hate bragging.
Teachers like my student?
What's that?
I said, are you saying that not all teachers like my child?
I will say most of our teachers will find a way to write a positive letter of recommendation for a student, but it's always better if it can be as like genuine as possible, you know? Next, the student essay is very important. So this is the student's opportunity to share their voice. And this year, I mean, it depends on the school. In a regular year, the student essay might be 10 to 30% of the decision. This year, that number might be a little higher, because most of the time test scores can be a lot more important, especially at larger institutions. And without the best test scores, you know, without a student getting a chance to take maybe at least 2 seatings of an exam, it's a lot harder for them to judge that information as well as they might have in the past. So the essay and crafting that well is important. So I'm going to pause really quick and say, I'm going to share this metaphor. FAFSA deadlines haven't changed, so it still opens October 1st. The way I described this to a student today is that you have a platter of cookies, and every one of those cookies is something you want a college to know about you. And it's evidence-based. So it's not, I'm a good person. It's like, okay, why are you a good person? Okay? Or I'm very devoted to service, and you want to be in an environment that that emphasizes service. Okay, how have you shown that? Okay, so one of your each one of these little cookies is on your platter, and your job is that over the course of your application, you give them all those cookies. So they can keep in mind even a bullet point list, and we just did an exercise in class that's a bullet point activity of the things that you want a school to know about you, and then make sure that in the course of that application, you have, you know, given them all those cookies. But front load the chocolate chips, okay? So front load the real good stuff. It's like when you get a box of Tiff's treats, okay? And like the good cookies are right there, and then you start getting in there, and suddenly it's all the oatmeal raisin and the snickerdoodles, and everyone's like, those are good, but really, like, you want to get to the good ones first. So seeing as I love baking and also cookies, I think this analogy really works. And one of the things parents can do is help students identify those cookies, because you know what's impressive to an adult, and help your kid identify those cookies and then figure out where they're going to go in. Okay, sorry, I had to share my cleverness. Moving on. Next, the letters of recommendation. So the teacher letter is about who is the student in the classroom. Now, a lot of times our teachers will write about what they do in the extracurricular, in their extracurricular life. That's honestly more my job than the teacher's job. But what I have coached our teachers to do is really focus on share an anecdote about this student, share a particular project where you saw growth in them, talk about who they are in the classroom. And then my job is to contextualize that. So let's say a student had a health crisis and their grades suffered. I can share that information. If a student has came to us from another school, they're going to want to know that because they see it in the transcript. And a student can take ownership of that information, but it's also my job to explain that. Another piece is, let's say a student was supposed to take a certain AP class, but it didn't work schedule-wise. That's something I can explain. So those are the kinds of things that it's important to share with me so that I can share that. Next, like I said, students should plan on being done by December 1st. I just want to make that abundantly clear. Past December 1st, we're looking at midterms, semester finals, holidays, just starting second semester when senioritis is hitting really hard. Let's try to be done by December 1st. And part of the parent job there is to help with the project management. So helping keep your students on track. I'm going to have colleges visiting and talking about a lot of these topics. So I'm going to have a college talk to us about how they make admissions choices, how they read an application, so that students have a good idea about how to best present themselves. So the main things that they're looking at are the transcripts. They want to see trends and challenges. They want to see the strength of your curriculum based on what is available at the school. So that means that if your student has exhausted the math and science here at Griffin, they're not going to be judged based on what someone at another school would have done. They're going to say, okay, they exhausted the math and science options. Awesome. Great information. Testing has a star here because standardized tests are more or less important at different schools. They like to see the grades in all courses. And this is kind of in order of importance, okay? They want to read the student essay. So they want to know, can you gather your thoughts? Can you put multiple things together? Are you able to communicate effectively? do you show curiosity? And the big one is, when we read student essays, is so what? Okay, so if I read an essay about a student whose grandmother passed away, I'm going to feel, and they tell me how amazing their grandmother was, I'm going to say, I wish I could admit your grandmother. What did this say about you? So this is an opportunity to talk about you, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a like spilling of guts. Okay, so it can really be show curiosity, show ambition, and give them some cookies. Some schools look at demonstrated interest. So that means those virtual visits. That means contacting an alumni. That means sending, responding to emails, reaching out to the regional counselor, stuff like that. And I can tell you which schools count that, because they share that information. Then they look at counselor teacher recommendations. The point of those is to essentially verify or support the application material elsewhere. So if I see a student who's taking a really strong course load, let's say their grades are good, like maybe they've got a B or two in an AP class, they've got A's in a couple of on-level courses. What the counselor and teacher recommendation is going to do is just support, like, yeah, look at this student. They work really hard. They're getting solid grades in these courses, and maybe some stuff about, maybe that teacher recommendation will talk about their strengths and maybe a little bit about room for growth, but our teachers will never write a negative letter. They'd rather say no to a student than write a negative letter. And they really want to get that fuller picture from the outside. So it should support and re-emphasize what the rest of this stuff is showing. Then they're looking at extracurriculars, and then they're looking at hooks. And this is, so extracurriculars, I'm saying this does not have to be a professional resume, but this year it kind of does. We kind of need a resume. And there's a sample resume that students can edit and alter to suit them on Google Classroom. And they just had an assignment to update it. The extracurriculars do not have to be extensive. We want to see something that's meaningful, that shows a commitment and maybe some leadership, not a ton of things, just a couple things that are meaningful and that there was a commitment. Hooks, these are things like an alumni applicant, they call them legacy, right? Might get an extra look. Athletes often can have, athletics are an influence at a lot of schools, especially even at the more competitive D3 schools. Obviously, students of color may have a benefit to applying at some institutions who are really trying to walk the talk of their diversity and equity initiatives. Talent, certain abilities. There may be an orchestra that needs a member. They may have a choir and really want a particular type of student. Obviously, also art and theater, dance, music, all of those things can be very helpful. Geography, certain regions are sought after. In Texas, in-state students get an advantage. And then there's invisible hooks. And the best description I can have for that is, let's say a college just got a bunch of money from a donor to start a classics department, and your student is applying as a classics major, even though their grades may not be as impressive as some of the other students. That might be the thing that gets them in there, right? Because they've got this money, they need that, they want that person. So just a thing to consider. Here are,
Julia,
yes.
how do I, well, I should say, is there a role that I need to play and helping my son ask teachers for that reference letter. I'm a little stumped about how I would help him pick.
He may have already done that, and if not, he can meet with me and do that, and we'll make sure it gets submitted that during our meeting.
Okay, well, I did schedule a meeting with you. I just, that's one of those things when I say, have you picked one? And he's like, I don't know, how am I supposed to pick? And I'm like, I don't know, how are you supposed to pick?
Definitely let's meet and we can talk about that, because that's usually a much easier thing than we think. It is hard for students to, they see requesting a letter of recommendation as asking for help. And it is, right? It is. But it's help that they need, but it's also help that they've earned. Yeah. Because they've worked hard and they've developed these relationships and they've shown this growth. And teachers love to share that when they've seen that. So it will be, I just saw Akina the other day, a student asked her for a letter of rec and she jumped up and down and almost cried. She was so excited to do it. So there's, most of the time our teachers are pretty thrilled. It's how to ask. So I have a template in my class, a Google Classroom template of how to request that letter. So I just want to share what those, yes.
Sorry, now are the kids also supposed to be getting letters of recommendation outside of school?
So it depends on the student and the program that they're applying to. Some colleges want 2 classroom teacher letters of recommendation and that's it. Some schools say, we'll take those teacher letters of recommendation and you can give us a reference from someone else. So if it's a coach or like a film teacher or something, like they'll read that additional piece of information. I want students and families to be thoughtful though about putting too much stuff in an application, because keep in mind that actual human people are going to read all of this stuff. So I always request that our teachers keep our letters of rec to 1 page, because I have a great deal of respect for the admissions counselors at these schools who are reading thousands of these. So let's not overload them with too much stuff. The job of the letter is to reinforce what the student has already done. So in most cases, a teacher recommendation isn't going to hugely sway the decision. It should just be a support for the decision. Does that make sense? Most colleges in this country are in this somewhat selective and selective category. It's only a couple hundred schools that are here. Yes.
I'm sorry, before, I had another question about the recommendation letters. It looks like you provided them with a template to write their own letters to the teachers. And Deckel was very confused with this, that he got very stressed that he has to write his own recommendation. Can you clarify what is expected from this templates, or what?
Sure. What is expected is that students approach the teacher with a considerable amount of respect, actually ask them if they will write the letter of recommendation, and then provide them with 1 or 2 anecdotes or things in class that they're particularly proud of. And the reason for that is that a teacher can talk about how much they like a student or how much growth they've seen. But again, I want people to be able to provide evidence. And it's just much more compelling to read a letter that says what the student is trying to do is just help spark the memory of the teacher. Because right now, our teachers, as all of us are trying to navigate online learning. They have families at home. They are dealing with all of their classes and all of their students. And what happened in class one day, a year and a half ago, they might not remember something that was very important and meaningful to the student, right? A very specific thing. And so I want our students to note that thing in the letter and just say, here's something that happened that I remember that was really impactful to me. Or here's a project we worked on that I was really proud of. And then the teacher can go, oh, right, that project. I remember when you worked on that and how much I liked this, this, and this. That gives me something more to write about. So 1 or 2 little anecdotes from class, and then actually asking, will you please write me this letter of recommendation for college, a list of a couple of the schools you're applying to, and a due date. I'm going to be applying early action November 1st to this college, and this college. Thank you so much for considering my request. So in most cases, it can sometimes be really helpful to have a conversation with the student about this and say, tell me about that class. Let's look at your Jupiter from last year and see, you did really great on this paper. What do you think was special about that? You know, so think about what was special that you can share just to help our teachers out, right? Because they'll spend a couple hours writing this letter. So we want to try to make it a little bit easier for them.
Yeah, completely makes sense.
Okay.
So one more thing, sorry.
No, that's okay.
So will the Common App or whichever app, will it say, like, we only want 2 teacher letters, or will it say, will they specify, or how do we find out?
It's all on SCORE. It's all on SCORE or Common App. And okay. So we're not going to request any letters through Common App. We're just going to do it through SCORE, because that's where I'm going to be sending the e-docs. But it's all good. I'll explain all of that to students, because that's like navigating software systems. But and I'll clarify
so
that
even
with
application through Common App, all of the paperwork goes through SCORE, and it'll become evident how many letters of recommendation are required on Common App.
The letters of recommendation information is on SCORE too.
I see, but it's also on Common App, or it's not?
Yes, it is on both of those places.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, please speak up, because I've got this full screen deal. Oh, the difference between transcripts and grades. I think they look at the transcript as a whole, right? So they're looking at that GPA number, they're looking at the whole picture, seeing all the different classes, and then often they'll take out the important material to them. So for some schools, they're looking at that whole number, and then some will create their own GPA based just on core academic classes. So they'll extract information. And it depends on the institution. It's not standardized at all, which is great, just great. Do I review them? I often do, yes. I like to go over students' activities list with them to make sure that the activities list is as thorough as possible. I like to go over every student's resume. I want to go through everything with them before they hit submit. Yes. All right, I'm going to try to get through the rest of this a little bit more quickly. So like I said, there are some factors within our control and some completely outside of it. How a student does in their, how a student shares their essay, totally in their control. How a student does in an interview, mostly in their control. Their grades from 10th grade, that's gone, right? That's over. So let's try to be thoughtful about how we approach things and what we control. I'm going to have a financial aid night September 16th, but I wanted to share some basics real quick. So I'm going to let you read this. Dwayne Quinn is a financial aid expert, and he consults with colleges and the federal government about financial aid. Do we like these theories or agree with them? Not entirely. So there's two applications. One for financial aid. One is FAFSA. Everyone should do FAFSA. The other is CSS Profile, which is used at some private institutions. There's about 250 of them. I'll get more into the weeds on this later. So CSS Profile is used by some institutions. They will take all of the information and they'll extract what they want from it. So at some colleges, that means that they're going to look at the home value or the equity in the home. At some colleges, they're like, no, we're not going to look at that. And we can find out which ones those are. And you can kind of base your applications on whether or not it's going to be reasonable for you to afford them. Because it's pretty hard to have a student apply to a school, get excited about a school, and it's really a broken system, because essentially there's two decisions, right? Let's say we have a student apply, they get accepted, and a couple days later they get the financial aid letter. So they can be accepted to the school, but not be given financial aid enough to make it realistic for the family. So it's better to do a little bit of work to figure out whether or not it's an affordable choice before applying. And I'll show you how to do that. Here are, and this will be in the PDF. Smart Track is a program that we have access to that will help with net cost calculation. The FAFSA Forecaster will help you determine your federal EFC, which is the expected family contribution. You can also do net cost calculators on a college website for the private institutions. And I would suggest doing a few different private institutions to get a more realistic number of what that would look like. So generally those are, what's that?
Can you go back one slide? There was something there that I had a question about, and then.
Sure.
It says using prior tax year returns 2017.
Sorry, that's not 2017. I didn't update that number. It uses prior year taxes. So it'll use 2019 taxes.
Okay.
Yeah, I just forgot to update that when I was updating my slides.
Yeah, it's fine. I just want to be sure I know what I'm pulling from.
Totally.
Is it due prior or prior? So would that be 2009?
Well, that might be 2018, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
I mean, it doesn't matter now, but by October it will.
Yeah. And also, I mean, you're going to submit this information, but due to COVID, so many people's financial pictures have changed. So it's just going to be, the financial aid piece is going to be a nightmare. It's going to be very surprising if families are able to make decisions by May 1st, which is the usual date that people commit. So I think some of this is just going to be playing it by ear, because let's say you do your FAFSA, 2018 looked great, but since then there's been job changes or job loss. There's been, a change in the financial picture, or someone, there's health changes. So I think everyone should expect that this will be just a very unfun, not that financial aid is ever fun, but this is going to be an especially unfun time, unfortunately.
Julia,
Yes.
now, when you fill out the FAFSA, those calculators, they ask for 2018. In January, does it roll over, and will they start asking for 2019?
Well, no, it's October 1st that it opens, and they'll want to have, really, they would like your FAFSA and profile in by the time that you send in your application. So if a student's application due date is November 1st, they're going to want this information by November 1st. Because what they want to do is send a letter of acceptance and a financial aid award letter at the same time. So that doesn't give you much time. This is a searchable spreadsheet of merit aid, which, friends, you're just going to have to spend some time with. It is glorious. This spreadsheet spreadsheet will tell you whether the school you're applying to, what percentage of non-need students receive merit aid and what the average amount of that merit aid is. So if you have need and you have the opportunity for merit, they're gonna do that to make it meaningful to you. And that's beautiful. It's really, really nice. So I'm going to share that spreadsheet with you, and you're going to be like, holy cats, this is great. That can just help you make some, you and your family make some informed choices. And also when you get that financial aid award letter, you can be like, can they do better than this? You know, and maybe they can. Okay, I had to emphasize with my face. College data is also a great resource. So that's just a website that's going to let you find all kinds of great stuff. Colleges award aid based on full cost. So that's tuition, room and board, travel to and from, clothes if you're going to need warm coats, just all kinds of stuff. So they base that on full cost. They cannot offer you more aid than you need and also accept federal dollars. So
Julia,
it takes this, yes.
back to the previous point you were making about
Sure.
negotiating financial aid.
Sure.
Can you generally be successful with that, or how does that kind of work?
Usually it has to do with a change in, like, if there is a significant change. So let's say a student is awarded merit aid based on their high school career up to now, and you say, hey, my senior year grades, here's my first semester senior year grades, plus I just did this, can we reassess the merit aid that you might award me based on this new information? So usually it has to do with that. And that is a conversation that you have with the admissions counselor. Any merit aid award is a conversation with the admissions counselor. Need-based award happens with the financial aid counselor.
Okay.
So if something has changed and your EFC has changed based on a circumstantial change in employment or income or extenuating circumstances, then that is a conversation you have about need. Merit awards are about saying, we want you here. So that's usually a sort of tuition discount. And some schools have very clear ways that they offer that, and many don't. So sometimes it's just worth a conversation and say, is that the highest merit aid award that you guys offer? What would I have to do to get up to that next tier? And you can have pretty frank conversations with colleges about that. And it's really helpful if a student has that conversation. You know, I'd like to, you know, I really love this school. I'd love to be able to consider it more seriously. Right now, the cost is too high for my family. What do I have to do to be considered for a higher merit aid award? You know, and sometimes they'll say, this is the best we can do. And sometimes they'll say, we'd like to see your first semester senior grades, you know? So financial aid night is coming. You saw that. It's on Google Calendar. What your role, this is the thing to consider. Have really like open and honest conversations about, okay, here's the plan, here's the timeline, here are our goals, how can I support you? Let's look at having a weekly check-in and see how things are going, because deadlines help. I like a college list that results in more acceptances than denials. I think that just reduces stress for everybody. I've had students who don't get accepted to the first college that they've applied to, and parents, your job is to go, man, that's a bummer. Let's go have some cupcakes and get sad about it and then move on, you know, because, you know, rejection is a part of this process, unfortunately. I really like there being college talk free zones. I think talking about college is really emotionally exhausting for kids. It causes so much stress for our students. I'm sorry for calling y'all kids. That's not really fair. Like a lot of they're feeling a lot of pressure.
I thought you
So
were calling me a kid. Sorry.
well, we are all our kids to some degree, but like I think it's really helpful to have some, okay, we're not going to talk about college at the dinner table. We're not going to talk about college in these circumstances. And this is really hard in a quarantine situation, which is why I think the weekly check-ins are really helpful. And then there's this podcast episode, which is Ethan Sawyer, who's called the College Essay Guy. He's a really kind of amazing resource and has a great website. He's talking to a woman who started the Grown and Flown like parent group. And she's just sharing the things she wished she'd done differently, supporting her kid through the college process. And I think there's some really helpful tips in there. You know, I think you can help your students shift into good stuff. Talk to them about the fun things that happened in college. Talk to them about the people you met there. And also update your information, because, you know, when I applied to UT in, I want to say it was 1999, I didn't know it was that selective. I was completely oblivious, and I applied as a transfer student. And when I got in, I was like, yeah, of course I got in. You know, it is way different now. You know, I've had parents say, well, if nothing else happens, they'll get into UT. And I'm like, it is harder to get into UT in some departments than it is to get into MIT. So we've got to update your expectations around certain schools. It used to be that Texas State, when it was called Southwest Texas, was kind of like a throwaway party school. And now it has a fantastic engineering program. It has one of the top business programs. It offers incredible resources in the biological sciences. And it's right down the road. So update your, like, get updated onto what the new thing, what the story is with modern colleges, with in terms of like the culture of the school and acceptance rates and all that stuff. Now, I know that there are probably more questions. What can I answer, if anything?
Julia, you had
Yes.
said something about the students talking to old alum.
Sure.
How would an admissions office find out whether they've spoken to that alum or not?
Well, usually it can, one of the things that you can do is reach out to the admissions office and the admissions counselor and in an email say, I just met with this alumni. So just tell them. The other thing is a lot of schools have alumni representatives in certain areas who will do interviews just to see if the student is a good fit or to ask questions or answer questions, and reaching out to the admissions counselor and saying, can you connect me with an alumni, a recent alumni? Can you connect me with a current student to talk about the school further? That can be really helpful.
Got it.
But I think just transparency is key. You know, I think the more straightforward, especially if students students should be sending all of these emails. Parents can be there for the Zoom call, but students should be, even if parents help them write the emails, students should be sending them. The main source of that communication should be student-centered.
Julia, how do we make an appointment with you? Shall I send you an email?
I have a link on, if you sign on to Jupyter and to the class, I'll put it in the chat. But yeah, you can send an email. I sent out an email to all the senior parents with my scheduler. So you can also look through that. But here's my.
I didn't Maybe I received and I didn't notice it.
That's
Sorry.
that's the link right there. You can just copy paste that into your, and if one of those times doesn't work because I've got, you know, carpool duty and kid duty to consider, let me know and I'll find a way to meet at another time. Okay.
And how do we request transcripts for certain universities? Is there any procedure for that?
Students, no, I mean,
You will
usually
submit-
I will submit them.
Okay.
I just need
There's-
the list updated on SCORE. The main thing is that if I don't know where to send transcripts, I can't send them.
Okay, yeah,
And SCORE is where I get that list.
gotcha.
Julia, where does the list, the spreadsheet that you said that illustrates the change in application acceptance if they do early decision, where's that spreadsheet?
I'll put that in the presentation when I send it as a PDF.
Okay.
Because it's cool. I mean, as much as some spreadsheets can be pretty cool, that one, it's like looking under the hood. It's pretty exciting, seeing how the
Okay,
sausage is made. All of that, there's a pretty cool resource called the Common Data Set. And all you need to do is look up a school and common data set, and it's going to tell you how much emphasis they put on demonstrated interest. It's going to tell you those percentages of regular decision versus early decision. It's going to tell you how much emphasis they put on testing versus blah, blah, blah versus blah, blah, blah. They share that information. So you can Google a college, blank college common data set, and a lot of them will have that information.
Okay.
And then there's an ephemeral part of it too, right? That has to do with, is this student going to be a good fit here? Are they ready for this level of independence or rigor, or are they going to fit in? Like there's some of it that's very data driven and some of it that's very touchy feely. So a balance of both, I think, is really helpful. I think for a lot of students right now, some students have their college list nailed. They feel great about it. Some students are still working on it. So figure out where your kid is, have that conversation with them, and then in the weekly check-in, say, all right, we're going to spend some time deciding on where we're going to apply to college now. You know, let's look at these schools. What's important to you? Let's find out if they have it. Let's do a virtual tour, you know, but make it part of discovery together. Because then it can be fun almost. Does anyone have any further questions, concerns, things that they want to address?
So you said something about us helping with project management, and that's my job. So I feel confident about my ability to make a plan. In the curriculum for their senior skills class, do you have some kind of milestones or timelines that I could build a plan around? Is that like those dates you showed earlier?
I think those dates are a great one because those are on Jupiter also.
Okay.
And really for a lot of schools, requesting that letter of recommendation and writing your essay, for a lot of schools, that's it. Request your letters, write that essay, and you're done. Some schools will want some additional information, and I'm actually having colleges come in and explain what they want to see in those sections. So when some colleges want a supplemental essay, so they want a little bit more writing about a topic, so it might be about leadership or career goals or whatever. So we think about that plate of cookies again.
Yeah.
And we say, why, if a college says, why do you want to go here? You think, how can I serve them one of my cookies while answering this question? How do I tell them what a great match we are? So I really think like the cookies is going to be a great approach
I mean,
there.
the analogy works for me. Plus, I'm a big fan, and of course, chocolate chips are the way to go. However,